Oh, this comment section's gonna be fun. So Captain Marvel tells the story of an intergalactic soldier with a forgotten past who crash lands on Earth and finds out who she was and who she is destined to become. Well, the time has come, people. It is time to review another Marvel Cinematic Universe film. Has it been 3 weeks already? I guess so. Captain Marvel. This is a film that has had an ungodly amount of controversy surrounding it, but I'm only mentioning that so that I can say this. I don't give a fuck about the controversy. This is not a commentary on the controversy. This is not me stating an opinion on the controversy, and I would prefer if the comment section would not turn into a discussion board for that controversy, even though I'm sure it's probably going to at some point. This is strictly about the movie. Is the movie good? Is the movie bad? So we're on the same page, right? Cool. Captain Marvel. Is it good? Is it bad? Let's get into it. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe is bringing us our first female-led superhero film within this universe. And this is a character who is supposed to be the most powerful character, at least up to this point, that the MCU has ever brought us. It's supposed to be kind of shepherding in this new generation of superheroes that is going to be carrying forth this universe after the events of Avengers Endgame, which is here in a couple of months, as well as introduce us to this character so that when she pops up in Endgame, we don't go, who the fuck is this? So starting right off with the positives for Captain Marvel. The biggest thing that I will say, and I am unashamed as a Samuel L. Jackson fanatic to say this, Samuel L. Jackson is awesome in this movie. I love the character of Nick Fury. I love how he's utilized in this movie. I think he has really good chemistry with Brie Larson. And I like how we get to see a different side of the character of Nick Fury. This is back in the 90s. This is back before he became Director Fury, before he lost his eye, before he became more grizzled and, had this more stoic presence about him. This is just an agent in the field who discovers that some alien shit actually exists and there might actually be superheroes out there. And I like getting to know his character in that mindset. He's very funny, he's very charming, he's got all the things that Samuel L. Jackson has brought throughout his entire career to almost every character that he has ever played. He delivers it in spades yet again. So I had a blast with Samuel L. Jackson, and in my opinion, he's the highlight of this movie as far as characters go.
You know how to fly this thing?
We'll see.
That's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Action sequences, CGI, special effects, pretty good, not bad. There are moments where the CGI and the action sequences are great. There are moments when the action sequences and the CGI look a little bit iffy, but as a whole, there's not a whole lot to complain about here. It's a very big world-building type of movie when it goes to different planets. This is a cosmic storyline, just like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok. This is MCU kind of stretching their legs a little bit more into that cosmic universe. There's a lot of space battles, there's a lot of aerial battles, there's a lot of lasers and neon lights and all kinds of crazy shit. It looks cool, it's fun to watch. The Skrulls. This is a race of beings who are introduced as the villains of this movie, and without giving away too much, I will say that they are a very interesting group of characters because of what this movie does throughout the runtime with those characters. At first, they seem very stock, very Star Trek-y kind of villains. They have the Romulan look that the J.J. Abrams' Star Trek had, and they have this shape-shifting ability where they can shape-shift into any human being that they see, and that adds to some decent little scenes of kind of mystery and tension about, is that person a Skrull, are they not a Skrull? And it kind of introduces this villain where you don't know where they are. There's a little bit of a hidden aspect to them through part of the runtime of this movie. So some of those elements regarding the Skrulls, especially how they kind of evolve those characters throughout the runtime of the movie, I enjoyed quite a bit.
So, Skrulls are the bad guys.
And my final positive is Jude Law. Not necessarily his character, because I have things that I will get into regarding his character in another section of this review, but the performance of Jude Law I think is great. This is a guy that when he kind of came onto the scene in the early 2000s, it felt like he was one of those actors that Hollywood was kind of shoving down your throat. He was in 5 movies a year. Every time you turned around, Jude Law was given this movie. And I never really warmed up to him during that time period. But in the late 2000s into today, he kind of started to trickle out a little bit more, started to take a little bit more interesting roles. And this is a guy that I have grown to love. I don't see him as often as he was when he was first introduced to Hollywood, but whenever I see the name Jude Law or whenever he pops up into a movie, I have zero doubts that he's going to give a great performance, and he does that in Captain Marvel. He has a great performance. He's good on both sides of his character without giving away too much. He's a more complicated character than he lets on to be in the early movie, where he's kind of just more of a mentor character. So I like what he brings to his character. Now we're going to talk about some mixed elements. Now, I don't often have to have a section in my review where I talk about mixed things. Usually things are very cut and dry, positive and negative for me, but there's quite a few things in Captain Marvel that I'm kind of on the fence about, so I kind of wanted to spend some time just talking about things that are kind of in that middle Venn diagram area. And since I was just talking about Jude Law as a performer, now I'll talk about his character, so I got a little continuity here. His character, the way that they kind of have his character arc develop throughout the movie, where things end up going with him, felt very paint by numbers. It felt like a character arc that we have seen dozens of times, not only within the MCU, not only within comic book films in general, but within movies. If you see by the end of the movie what his character goes through and how he changes and how certain things are revealed regarding his motives and certain things that he does, you've seen it a million times before. And I don't even really consider that much of a spoiler, because as soon as you start watching this movie and you start seeing where things start with him and how his stance is with training Captain Marvel, you're going to see the writing on the wall very quickly, because we've seen this dozens and dozens of times before, how a character like that evolves throughout a movie like this in an origin story. So to me, he is one of the handful of things that I'm going to get into here that feel very paint by numbers about this movie. Now, while we're on the subject of paint by numbers, origin story template. This movie follows it to the fucking T. The MCU formula. Guys, I love the MCU. I love DC, I love MCU, I love the Fox X-Men movies. I'm just a comic book fan and a comic book movie fan in general. But the MCU movies is the only genre of comic book films that I am really starting to feel the fatigue with. I don't have comic book fatigue. I don't have comic book movie fatigue, because I loved Aquaman. I can't wait for Endgame. I can't wait for Shazam. I loved Glass, if you consider that a comic book film. But the MCU, especially when they go into these standalone movies or these origin stories, I feel fatigued as hell, because they have this A to Z template and formula that they have followed since Iron Man, and they have hardly deviated away from that at all, especially regarding these origin stories and these standalone movies, that to the point now where you watch Captain Marvel, and what should be a movie that really impresses us with some of the things that it does and going into the cosmic realm. It's about an Air Force pilot who loses her memory, becomes an intergalactic warrior who has to find her place in the universe and defeat and vanquish this war between two battling races for intergalactic domination and all this crazy epic shit. And it feels like, we've been there, done that. Like, at this point, a movie like this should not feel that way, and that's because the MCU formula just feels fucking repetitive and redundant by this point. And they follow it to the T in Captain Marvel. If you have ever seen an origin story movie in your life, you will be able to see the entire story arc that she goes through in this movie before the fucking opening credits are done. And I use that as a mixed element because I like origin stories. There's a reason why there's a formula, because it usually works. I mean, even Marvel, as much as I want to criticize them for sticking to their formula, you can't argue with their success. All of their movies have been good. Even the worst MCU movie, I would still consider a watchably good movie. So it's a mixed element because, yeah, it's a good comic book origin story, but it's the comic book origin story that we have seen time and time and time again, especially within the MCU. Now let's talk about Brie Larson. Now, as I stated at the beginning of this review, I'm not here to talk about the controversy. I never really bought into the controversy, never really gave much of a shit about it, still don't give much of a shit about it. So what I'm about to say about Brie Larson has absolutely, positively nothing to do with any controversy or strong opinions regarding her as an actress, as a person, or anything that she has said in the lead up and the marketing of this film. Brie Larson as an actress in this movie is just okay. I like Brie Larson as an actress. I really liked Room. I thought she deserved her Oscar for that. I think she's going to do great things later on. But I compare what she does to Captain Marvel with what Jennifer Lawrence did with Mystique. Jennifer Lawrence is a world-class actress. When you put her in the role of Mystique, she feels bland as fuck. And I don't quite think that Brie Larson is as bad as Jennifer Lawrence is in some of her worst moments in the X-Men universe, but Brie Larson, through about 60 to 70% of this movie, feels monotone and feels one note. I know there was a big meme regarding her being, unemotive and just kind of being stone-faced and having the resting bitch face on permanent and everything like that. Again, not playing into any of that controversy, but just taking it as a performer and what she brings to the character. 60 to 70% of this movie feels that way. It feels like she's a little bit robotic. It feels like a little bit like she's kind of on autopilot sometimes. And honestly, to be fair, I don't know if that's her fault. I don't know if that's her performance coming through that way. I don't know if that was a creative choice by her or the director, because she is technically an alien who has forgotten how to be human because she never remembers being human in the first place. So some of the more human interactions doesn't really come natural to her. Possibly. Jude Law seemed to do fine with it, but possibly. I don't know. But most of the movie, it felt like, damn, she's not really bringing a whole lot to this. There's even moments in this movie where there's those superhero lines. You know, there's those big lines of delivery. You see them in the trailer where she's like, I'm not here to participate in your war. I'm here to end it. And even the way that I said it right there has more gusto to it than she brings to it. So when she says a line like that, it feels kind of throwaway. It feels like more just kind of a beat by beat line. It doesn't feel like one of those standout lines, those standout moments that make Captain Marvel, you know, punch through the screen. And I think that has to do with her performance and how she delivers it. Now the other 30% of the movie, 40% of the movie, whatever, she's good. She does have some funny lines. She does have good interaction, especially with Samuel L. Jackson, with some of the characters on Earth that she has to rekindle a relationship with. She does have a good complicated relationship of mentor and apprentice with Jude Law. So she's good with most of that. And I think that as she grows in this universe, we could possibly see a different side of her character now that we've got the origin shit out of the way, and she might grow into this role and be very good. But as far as what's delivered in this movie, gotta call a spade. She didn't really blow me away. Now moving into my negatives with Captain Marvel. And the big negative for me is just the way that they present the story and the way they present this character. It's not all that interesting, if I could be honest with you. And it's not just because they follow the template, it's just the way that they decide to tell the story of who Captain Marvel is. This is the first time that the MCU has delivered a brand new character, even in movies that I think are mediocre or good or on the lower rung of the MCU. One of my positives has always been, but the character was great, but I want to see more of the character, but the character really popped on screen. This is the first one where Captain Marvel might be one of the biggest weaknesses in her own movie, because they just don't really give us much to learn about the character. They basically just tell you that she has a forgotten past, and they slowly piece together this past in the movie, but you don't really get to know her. You don't really get to feel who this character is. She's just a lost person with some power she doesn't really know how to utilize, and by the end of the movie, she figures out who she is and figures out how to use her powers. There's even like not really a big conflict by the end of the movie that she has to resolve, aside from defeating who the big villain is and just moving on into Avengers Endgame. And it just doesn't really feel like there's a huge payoff by the end of the movie with her character arc, with her journey, with the struggle, with the climax of the storyline. It feels very kind of monotone. And I never really felt like watching this movie, I got to know this character who is going to shepherd through this new age of Avengers, of this new age of the MCU. It just doesn't feel like her character. Maybe that's how it is in the comic books. Maybe she's not that interesting of a character to me, and if I read the comic I'd say the same thing, or maybe it's just the way they presented it in this movie. It just doesn't really feel like the character herself popped on screen as much as the first female lead superhero in the MCU should have. And kind of going along with that, I do feel like this movie does beat you over the head a little bit too much with the message they're trying to get forth with this first female-led thing. I'm going to compare it to Wonder Woman, not because of a Marvel versus DC thing, but because that's the most obvious comparison to make. The first female-led superhero movie in the DC universe and the first female-led movie in the MCU universe. Wonder Woman never really had to beat you over the head with the message of this strong female character who is coming to rise and coming to kind of grow into her own and become this legendary hero that she is. Captain Marvel feels like it has to remind you multiple times throughout the movie. It's not to the point of being annoying, but it's to the point where I noticed it, and to me that's annoying enough. I already know what the stakes of this movie are. We all do. Some of it created controversy, some of it created backlash to the controversy. We know the importance of who Captain Marvel is to the MCU and to film and just to, you know, females in general. We get it. We don't need the movie to remind us constantly. They even take jabs at like Trump era stuff with the wall and with immigration, and I know that's a big topic of debate nowadays, but again, that's just stuff where it's just like, By the time this movie came out, I'm sure when they were writing it, it was probably something new to talk about. Ooh, we're going to put some controversy in here. We're going to, speak about some social aspects. But by the time it's come out, there's already been 18 movies that have done that. So by now, it's just like, okay, we get it. I just want to watch a comic book movie. But the whole thing about just beating you over the head with strong female who's been put down, they give you multiple flashbacks of her, falling and getting up, and kind of the symbolism of a woman being beaten down or pointed at by her dad and everybody else. Like, you're never going to make it. You're never going to succeed in this world. You're never going to be able to fly. You're never going to be Too much. And my final negative of this movie, which is half a strong point that I want to make and then half kind of nitpicking. So really, I'll split them into two. So the first aspect of this negative, overall, it's just about it being a prequel in the 90s. The first half of this negative is this movie falling into the common traps that prequels fall into. All of the winks and the nods and the setups and the little jabs at like, hey, this is how that one thing got created. Hey, here's how he lost his eye. Hey, here's how that one name came about. And to me, it's so obvious and it's so on the nose and it's just so shoved in your face with prequels that it never lands the way that it should. Maybe that's just the common pitfalls of prequels. That's why I don't really tend to like prequels all that much, because you know exactly where things are going to end up and you know it's going to be riddled with all these little wink and nod moments. But they annoy me. They annoy me personally. When I see things that I already don't really care how the name Avengers came about, or how Nick Fury lost his eye, or how anything else in this movie decides that it wants to give you a small little answer for, I don't really care, because I was never asking those questions. So when the movie stomps on the brakes to give you a little wink and nod moment to answer a question I was never asking, it's annoying for me. And the last thing, which kind of goes along with that, but this is much more of just a nitpicky thing, is the constant 90s references. Now, I've already been somebody that's said in multiple reviews that I'm kind of fatigued with 80s nostalgia. Sometimes it's utilized well, sometimes it just feels like this trope that we're in nowadays where the 80s nostalgia thing is in, so everything has to utilize it to some degree. This movie goes for 90s nostalgia, and the movie just like beating you over the head with the message, it beats you over the head with it being in the 90s. I mean, every single time you look around, there's some kind of a wink and nod moment that this is in the 90s. There's a couple that's utilized well. The one that was in the trailer where she crash lands and then it pans out and it's a blockbuster video. That is awesome. That's nostalgic as hell because that stuff doesn't exist anymore, except for one apparently in Oregon. But there's good utilized ones like that. And then there's times where it feels like every other scene they have to throw in some 90s song, like they're building up some, soundtrack that they want to sell along with this, like The Wedding Singer did. There's moments where there's articles of clothing, like the first Earth clothing that she gets is a Nine Inch Nails grunge outfit, which is like, in the 90s, that wasn't the common outfit that was hanging on the outside of clothing stores, so that's a little bit on the nose again. Even scenes where she's talking to this ultimate intelligence within this little cosmic realm in her mind, and the cosmic intelligence is playing Come As You Are by Nirvana in the background. It's just like, okay, we get it, it's the 90s. The 90s, you didn't walk around in 1995 and everything screamed, hey, it's 1995, bitches. Tone it down a bit. It can be cool, but you're putting it on too thick. Overall, guys, this is a movie that I would recommend to all fans of the MCU. I would recommend to most comic book film fans, but this is honestly an installment in the MCU that feels like a Phase 1 movie that has been shoved into the end of Phase 3. And it feels like the movie serves the character's placement in Avengers Endgame more than it actually serves the character. It feels like the movie was pushed out really quick so that nobody asks any questions when she shows up here in May or June, whenever that movie comes out. And it doesn't really build the character herself. But it does everything that an origin story tends to do right. It gives you all of the different beats that you go through with an origin story. There's some great characters. I love seeing Samuel L. Jackson. There's some pretty good action sequences, some pretty good CGI, moments where it's not, but for the most part it's all good. And this is one of those movies that makes you beg the question for MCU. Is Captain Marvel, the way that it seems like a lot of people that I know so far are receiving this film, is this a product of us being spoiled because now we get 4 or 5 comic book movies a year, and even a movie like this that's just good suddenly feels a little bit lackluster by comparison? Is that our fault for being spoiled? Or is that Marvel's fault for not evolving? They changed the game, they introduced this whole cinematic universe, they rebuilt the stage as far as what a comic book movie can be, and now comic book films are the biggest and most frequent types of films that we get all year long. Is it their fault for not evolving once again with the game that they changed that has changed since then? Because I'll tell you this, I put out a tweet, and I know this might piss off some Marvel fans, but it's absolutely the truth. If WB and DC starts hitting their stride, which it seems like from the early reactions we're getting from social media reactions about Shazam, they probably are hitting their stride now with Aquaman and Shazam. If they start hitting their stride and start pumping out some good movies, Marvel's gonna have to shake some shit up. Because once that competition really starts being an actual competition, which they've never really had before, they're gonna start being held to a little higher standards for what they do to change their movies and give their movies a little bit more flavor than they have been for the past 11 years. One man's opinion, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna come to fruition. So MCU, if you're watching this, you still have a perfect track record as far as making good movies, but it's time to evolve. So if you're a fan of the MCU, if you're a fan of the character of Captain Marvel, or just a comic book fan in general, there's a lot to like about Captain Marvel. Unfortunately, this feels very paint by numbers. It feels like they really missed the mark with delivering another great character to the universe. And it feels like the actress possibly was not given enough to do, or might have even been miscast. So with all of that being said, Captain Marvel is a movie that you should check out. You're not gonna miss out on anything if you just hang on and stream it. So what did you guys think of Captain Marvel? Are you a fan of this movie? Did it just go into your top rung of MCU movies, or did this go into your bottom rung of MCU movies? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you like the character? Did you hate the character? Did the 90s references and the message beating you over the head annoy you, or did you love all of that stuff? Put all of your thoughts on Captain Marvel and the MCU overall. Try to stay away from the controversy, please. Down in the comment section below, guys, and we will talk about it. And don't hold me to this, but my plans as of now is sometime tomorrow to release an updated ranking of the MCU and possibly even do a spoiler talk on this film at some point live this weekend. Not a promise, just depends how my schedule goes, but that is the plan as of now, so keep your eye out for that, hopefully. If not, you'll see me next week with some other horror movie to talk about, because I still have a lot of Patreon requests. I still have the Freddy kill ranking and some other stuff that I announced to you guys on the community post, so keep an eye out for that for sure. And please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already become a subscriber. Please check the video description below for Cody Leach stuff like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, my Spreadshirt store for cool merchandise like t-shirts and other custom designs made by the great Woody Bowen, and my Patreon page, which is a great way to give back to this channel and help this channel grow and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only if you decide to become a patron. So check all that out, guys. And if you want to check out some more of my reviews, including other past MCU films and rankings, you can check that out by clicking right over here.